What's good, YouTube? It's me, your boy Squid, back in another video. Let's talk about hand traps for a second, because we have the NA WCQ coming up this weekend, and we've already had a couple of WCQs, so we kind of know how the metagame is shaping up. I've had 4 categories here. Obviously, amazing, meaning that the hand trap should probably be in every deck. Good, meaning that it shouldn't be in every deck, but it's still playable to the extent where you should probably include it. Mid, meaning that it's decently playable, but probably not the best card. There are probably better choices, but it still has some niche application. And horrendous, being basically unplayable. So starting at the beginning, Ash Blossom is obviously in the amazing category, because this card is just... I know it's not the best against certain decks like Kashtira, you're kind of going neg on that trade, but it's still good enough where it's like a very defensive card that's all around well-rounded in the metagame. It's good against everything, and then decks that it's absolutely amazing against, like Branded, it's just like an auto win in certain times, right? So just having this card in your deck is absolutely mandatory in my opinion, at least in the side deck if you choose not to main it. If you're playing something like Dragons or like a combo deck that's more high impact where you need more non-engine high impact board breakers, then I could see an excuse for siding this against decks like Branded where it's actually good, but otherwise I think it should definitely be in the main or side deck. BYSTIALs are obviously, I think, between good and amazing. I want to say that they're decently amazing because of the fact that you can get extra bodies off of Magnemite, and the decks that it's good against, you get an extra body on the end phase, so you get to have an interaction for the following turn. And against decks like Dragons or against Branded, this is a very good card because you're always getting a 2-for-1 interaction. If you happen to be playing Dragons, or other dragons in your deck where you can make use of Magnemite search in the end phase, that just makes it even better. So in my opinion, it's definitely a high tier card that you guys should definitely be playing. If not a Bystial, then you should be playing Belle, which should also be amazing because of the interaction that this has across the metagame. Against the decks that you do bring it in, it's often very, very powerful. Against Branded, it's decently good. Just remember to play around Branded Lost, because that does stop you from negating their activations with Ghost Belle, but it still works against things like Sanctifier Dragon. It's very, very powerful against Labyrinths as well, because you can hit Big Welcome Labyrinths, which is often game ending if you can do it at the right moment. If you can prevent them from searching Eradicator, this is one of the cards to do it. So in my opinion, it should definitely be in everyone's side deck, if not for the Bystials. I personally think that Belle's a little bit better right now because of the fact that it's good against the trap decks, against Labyrinth, being able to special summon from the graveyard with Big Welcome as well. Chaos Hunter, I think, is... I want to say between good and mid. The reason why I'm going to put it in mid is because it's not a really card you can side right now, but I see some players being able to tech this into their engine. For example, with Sprite, with Mannequin Cat, you can do this when they shifter you, so you can reborn their shifter, giving the Kashtira player a monster that they have to get rid of in order to summon their monsters, as well as being able to turn off that shifter for the rest of the turn by special summoning out a Chaos Hunter, which is the dark monster from your deck, and then in turn, it stays on the field, so on the Kashtira player's turn, they're not able to banish, which hurts them as well. So I think it's mid because you can tech it into the deck, but you generally don't have a lot of decks where you can actually eat the neg 1 discard, the hard discard, to justify playing this, especially when it's easily outed in Kashtira against something like a Scareclaw Kashtira, so it's not like a be-all shut down for that deck, right? But it's good enough that you can summon up Mannequin Cat, so let's put it in mid. I think DD Crow, I want to say it's a little mid right now, just because it's not playable against Kashtira, but it could very close being good because it does have a lot of applications against other decks. It's decent against Runic for Hire. You're able to banish the card that they try to resurrect with Rex. You're able to hit the live twins, Kiskil and Lilla, against that matchup because you generally only have 1 in the graveyard. Even though it's non-targeting for the evil twins, you can still hit the opposite link that they have in the graveyard, and generally they only have 1. And it's also decent against Rika Sunvalon because you can hit the Sunseed Lokai that they try to bring back off Sunseed Twin in that combo, so it has a lot of applications. I just think that it's shadowed by a lot of other cards in the metagame right now, and generally you don't really have like space to side this card. But if you find that you're playing a heavy hand trap deck like Purely or something and you do have the engine, then definitely you can add this in, I think. So it's between mid and good. It's really, really hard to say. Artifact Lancea, I think, is pretty horrendous right now. I know some players are actually testing it against Kashtira, but again, it doesn't really stop everything. It stops, obviously, their main combos, stops Fenrir, stops Unicorn. It's especially good if you have a board, and it does stop Pot Up Prosperity and also Desires to that extent, but I think Kashtira players are generally being able to play around this still. They're still able to put up Fenrir and Unicorn. If you're going second and you drop this, it doesn't really do anything, and you're down a card. going first, it's a lot better if you have a board, but if they're able to still play through things with their other non-engine like talents and stuff like that, they can still make a Zeus and wipe your board. So I just don't like the card very much. I've never really liked cards that are -1, even though they're blankets, unless they're absolutely blowout effects like Dimension Shifter, which is obviously an amazing card because it turns off your opponent's entire deck, basically. I would personally on the fence about actually main decking this in Cash Tier because Cash Tier decks do require a lot more space for non-engine that's good against the entire playing field, and I feel like Shifter is not that good against all the decks. For example, against Labyrinth, it's not that great because they're still going to be able to set like Golden Match and Scale Drain. They don't really care if their Labyrinth traps get banished. It does stop potentially like the furnitures, but they can just chain on top of your Shifter to send the furnitures anyways if they happen to hard draw them. So in that sense, I think it could potentially be in your side deck, but against in decks like Cash Tier or Flunderies where you can actually play this, it's obviously just an amazing card that deserves to be banned in my opinion. So that's another video for another time, but we'll put it in amazing for now. I actually think Droll and Lockbird is in the good stage. I was debating between the mid and the good, but the sheer fact is that Droll and Lockbird stops a lot of combo decks right now, including the Rika Sunvalon deck, which happened to win the Euros in WCQ. It does stop them to an extent. Obviously, they can still play those. So against that deck, you do have to pair it with something else. If they happen to open like a Rika Concon, they can just set the trap. And then they kind of have like 2-for-1 interruptions just as is off one field spell. And they also might have Rika Princess as well on top of that, which they could potentially stop the draw if they happen to open good and can start their plays with Rikas. And I think this card is actually good against dragons as well, and it's decently good against some other decks in the format, also against the Runic for Hire, so you're guaranteeing they're not drawing. The only issue with the Runic cards is that you might run into the situation where they just draw on your turn because they have the Runic spells in the graveyard, right? So that's just one thing to note, but I think it's good enough to play because it's decent against the entire metagame. It's decently sided in. It does a little bit. It doesn't do all of it, but it does enough, so I think it's good. Effect Failure, I think it's definitely mid. There are a lot more better cards right now, especially because Cash Tier or Rise Heart just prevents you from using this. But obviously, if you draw it, you can still use it against other things like Fenrir. But the problem is against Cash Tier, these 1-for-1 trade hand traps are always negging because they're not losing any cards, and they still get value out of the Fenrir or the Unicorn on your turn by banishing your cards. So I don't think it's that good, but if you're playing a deck where you have the space to accommodate Veiler, if you're playing other cards like Nibiru as well to like negate combo decks like Baron and just pair it with a Veiler, then it could be a very, very good blowout card. So I think it could be something that you could definitely consider. I actually think Phantasmay is in the mid section. This is a card that I've been hyping up in a lot of my videos. I think it's really, really good because there are a lot of powerful Link decks out there right now as we speak. But the issue is there are always better cards to side because this card is very niche against those Link decks, whereas you'd rather side other cards in your deck against a wide variety of the playing field, or there just happen to be better cards against that certain matchup, right? So Phantasmay doesn't make sense to bring in over something like a Dark Ruler if you're playing against something like a Runic Sprite. Even though they're linking like the for hire cards, you still would rather have the Dark Ruler to blanket and negate their entire field, whereas Phantasmay doesn't do that. It just allows you to draw into potential board breakers or more hand traps. So on its own, it's not powerful enough. That's why I want to put it in the mid. But if you ever have space to play this card, I think it's absolutely amazing because it can fix your hand with bricks, which is a crucial issue in today's Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of the fact that a lot of cards are one-card starters, one-card starter decks, and then you pair with a lot of non-engine, so they typically happen to brick a lot. So this circumvents that. Ghost Mourner, I want to say is, personally, I think it's mid. I just don't think that it's that good because, again, against decks like Cash Tier, you're kind of negging on that trade. Against decks like Rika Sunvalon, it's a little better because you're able to snipe a Link, but the issue is some effects like Jasmine, they're not on the summon necessarily. They're an ignition effect that they can activate later, so they can easily just link off into another one and use the effect. Because Ghost Mourner has to be shotgunned on the summon, it can't be chained necessarily to a non-trigger effect that doesn't activate on the summon, so that makes it a little bit worse in my opinion. In fact, I almost think that Effect Failure could potentially be better, but the thing with Ghost Mourner that's nice is you can hit things outside of the main phase. So against Purely, if they happen to use their effects in the draw phase to play around Droll and Lockbird, you can actually hit them, and Ghost Mourner is actually very good against that deck as well because they're always using their effects on the trigger on the summon. So this could potentially be a good card, but I just think there are better options right now. And you know, Ghost Ogre is between horrendous and mid because of the fact that it does hit a lot of cards that are prevalent in the metagame. There are actually a lot of good players on the purely deck right now because they realize it has a good Keshtira matchup. You can actually easily make Zeus, you can easily play a board wipe like Dark Ruler, and then make a huge Zeus that they can't really deal with easily. You can easily make a fat X purely Noir if you happen to hit the 33% chance to hit Happy Memory off of, or Delicious Memory rather, off of the My Friend Purely on turn 1 if you're going first, or even just set a trap so you're guaranteed to get the X Purely Noir. This actually hits, Ghost Ogre hits the My Friend Purely, it hits the field spell. You can also hit the Purely effects on the field to destroy them that way, especially if they have a field spell up, so then their cards cannot be targeted. So this could actually be very clutch on a Purely Lily to prevent them from ranking up into their XYZ. So in that fact, I actually want to say it's decently mid. Against Kashtira, it's not awful because you can actually hit Kashtira Birth as long as they don't have an Arise Heart out. Against Runix, it could have some value if you hit the Fountain, if they already have a Link monster in their extra monster zone, so they cannot summon out a Hugin to protect it. It could actually have some marginal value there. So that's just one thing to be aware of. Also, if they use IP Masquerade to bring out a Griffin and they are choosing to go for the greedy play to set one of their spells in the graveyard, you could potentially chain the Ghost Ogre to get rid of that before they can put it on the board as a floodgate, right? Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries I think is personally horrendous because there are not a lot of decks that can actually have the extra deck volume to accommodate all the targets for this card, and it's also a hard -1. None of the current decks in the metagame right now rely strictly on one extra deck monster besides something like a Sky Striker deck or a Vanquish Soul deck, and even then they can still play normally using the rest of their engine, right? If you're hitting Sky Striker Kagari, they can still search with Shizuku and you're going -1, they're going +1, so you're 2-card differential. It just hurts a lot. I don't think this card is remotely playable right now. The only deck I think it could be playable in is Vanquish Soul because you have so much extra deck space, but I don't think it's worth it. I think Imperm is still good enough to play right now because it hits a lot of the other decks. It's a good card that you can draw as a 6 that you can hit something like an Arise Heart, especially if your deck struggles against Arise Heart. If you're playing Dragons or Rika Sunderland or any graveyard-based decks like Tearlaments, this could be decently good. I would suggest potentially holding this for strictly the Arise Heart instead of using it on a Unicorn or a Fenrir, because if they have the other combo pieces, they're going to make Arise Heart anyways. So if your deck loses to that, definitely hold this card in your hand until you can deal with the problem monster that's preventing you from playing. It's just good in general because you can hit a variety of decks. Even against like Flunderees, it's still decently good. And then the only deck that's kind of bad against is Labyrinth because it doesn't really do anything. But if you happen to play Triple Tactics Talon or something, you can steal their Labyrinth Lady and use the effect potentially to chain on one of their traps to set your own Imperm, or steal the other Lovely Lady to set the Imperm from your graveyard. So that's kind of cool interactions that you can have there. Just one thing to note, that you do need a Fiend for Lovely Lady, so bear that in mind. The PSY-Frames right now, I think they're pretty horrendous. I'm going to put these 3 in 1 because we know that PSY-Frame Gamma already got limited, so there's no reason to be playing that card potentially, unless you're playing something like Labyrinth where PSY-Frame Gear Gamma can actually get a lot of value beyond being just a monster negate. Being able to bounce it back as well as being a level 2 light body to make Chaos Angel is absolutely crazy. So having those as a toolbox in the deck could potentially outweigh the cons of playing 1 brick as well as 1 powerful card. With a driver. You could also play it with the PSY-Frame Epsilon as well as the PSY-Frame, I believe, Delta that negates spell cards. But the only thing with Delta is it only negates spell card activations and not the effects. So it actually doesn't work on something like a Kashtira Birth because they could just activate another one from hand and still use the effect. So it loses a lot of value there. And a lot of spell cards like Triple Tactics Talent are, if the activation is negated, they can just activate another one. So if they happen to open multiples, it just does nothing. Epsilon, I don't think there are a lot of traps to negate in the format right now beyond like something like Eradicator or D-Barrier if you're playing Branded. But I don't think it justifies playing right now just with the 1 card of Gamma. Nibiru, obviously, I think is good right now, but it's floating between good and mid. The problem with Nibiru right now is the fact that it's not decently good against a lot of decks beyond Kashtira. Even against Kashtira, they can actually play around it by making a Rise Heart pass if they have something like a Forbidden Lance to protect it. Or they could just pass on Unicorn Fenrir. You never know what they're going to do. It's only good when they combo. And the issue is when they combo, they could still bring back a Fenrir potentially off of the Birth because they usually don't use it until the very end. And then they could set their non-engine cards. You might also be under Shifter, so if that hurts, the Nibiru doesn't really equalize a lot. It just gives you 1 turn to try and survive, but it doesn't auto-win the game on the spot. However, it's decently good against when you're pairing with other hand traps, so you have ways to stop their pushes on the consecutive turn. And I just think this card is absolutely horrible against decks like Runic, where they have the Sprite Red to negate. Against Fur Hire, it's not that great. Gigantic Sprite, turning it off. Against Labyrinth, it's obviously unplayable. Against Rika Sundelon, it's decently good, but if they open well, they could also establish the Hyperton to negate it beforehand, or just continue to play even after you nib, because there are certain points where you have to Nibiru before they get something like the, if they're playing the Regulus engine before that, for example, they're still going to be able to put up some negates. Even with the Rika's field spell, they're still going to be able to set Rika's sheet, so you're going to have to deal with the sheet, and you already have the Nibiru bounty on board, so any other monster you commit on the board can be negated and tributing off your Nibiru to steal and take control of it. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. That's why I think it's between good and mid. Personally, I don't know if I would play this for that event, but it depends on what you guys are anticipating for the event. So yeah. And then last but not least, I actually think Retaliating C is quite good right now. A lot of people have forgotten about this card. But guys, this is a very, very clutch card against a lot of decks in the format, including Purely, because you can chain it to any quick play spell. It's good against Branded because it's basically a shifter that you can use against Branded Fusion. It's decently good against other decks like Gold Pride Punk that plays E-Telly. It's good against Sky Striker because they have the Shark Cannon that would potentially special summon a monster. And you can use it even if they have less than 3 spells in the graveyard, because it includes the potential effect of special summoning on the resolution by checking spells in the grave. So this is definitely a card that I would recommend. It's also good against Runics because you can chain it to when they try to special summon off of a Runic card. So I think this putting out body on the board that's a level 4 is decently good. It's obviously not that playable against in decks like Kashkira, where you absolutely need your board to be empty in order to start playing. But I think in other decks, if you can provide this and not be afraid of a Macrocosmos during your turn, because this does affect yourself as well, then you could definitely splash this in and see how it works in your side deck. So yeah, that's about all I had for this video. If you guys have any good tips or other hand traps that I'm missing out on actually for the event itself, definitely let us know in the comments below. Other than that, we'll see you guys this weekend. I'll be there. So we'll see y'all, and yeah.